War has been a constant since the dawn of man. At first, it was one man against one man, then clans and tribes against each other. Soon, cities and nation-states were engaged in ruthless battles against each other for land, resources, national pride, and revenge. As time went on, wars only got bigger, and the devastation that followed didn't only affect those who fought in them. Writer-director Paul Schrader has taken a look at the consequences of war on those who fought in them, lost loved ones, had their national pride destroyed, and carried out unspeakable actions on behalf of patriotism. In this video, I would like to look at the case that Paul Schrader has quite possibly made a quadrilogy of films that have done better than most cinema out there today on exposing the effects of war, not only on the soldiers who fought in them, but on those on the home front as well. Those who have seen their children taken away from them, had their morality stripped from them, and those who have had their pride grabbed out of their own hands. This is Paul Schrader and the Consequences of War. The earliest film in Paul Schrader's career where the effects of war are touched upon significantly is the 1976 film directed by Martin Scorsese, Taxi Driver. In this film, we follow Travis Bickle, a Vietnam combat veteran who takes up a job driving a taxi at night because he can't sleep. While Bickle's a psychopath, it's not far of a reach to say that what he saw in Vietnam contributed to his present condition. If not, then why bring it up? He has a fascination with firearms. He jerry-rigs devices that allow him better tactical advantage over his enemies. He works out regularly once he finds a mission worth pursuing to give his life the only meaning it's ever had since leaving the military. The Vietnam War damaged a whole generation of people. Women, children, and in this country in particular, the men who were lucky enough not to be one of the 58,220 US troops who died. The military and war created a killing machine in Travis Bickle. How does someone who's known nothing but war, death, and destruction reintegrate back into society, unfazed by that? Bickle couldn't handle the societal pressure, the difference between Vietnam and New York in the 70s, and therefore he acts out. While Taxi Driver doesn't exactly have the same overt commentary on war that the later films we'll discuss do, this is, however, the first step in a growing evolution and fascination with the subject that would not only lead to some of the best films in his entire career, but also some of the most important films in the anti-war genre. While Travis Bickle's character was about an American soldier who faced the consequences of US imperialism on his psyche, Paul Schrader's 1985 film Mishima took a look at a protagonist who was on the receiving end of US aggression. The melodic and experimental biopic that is Mishima, A Life in 4 Chapters, takes a look at Yukio Mishima, who is possibly one of the most celebrated authors in Japan up until his death in 1970. The film takes a kaleidoscopic look at Yukio Mishima's past, from his upbringing to the formation of his own private military, his last day alive, and dramatizations of some of his most formative and important works. Anyone with a cursory knowledge of Japan knows that the end of World War II was a defining moment for the nation. Japan's cultural attitude towards militarization and imperialism changed dramatically after the dropping of the atomic bomb. But this wasn't necessarily a unified transition to the Japan that we know now for waifus and tentacle porn. Japan, mostly, but not entirely abandoning its militarist roots, may have begun after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but it wasn't exactly met with open arms from the country's right wing. Mishima himself referred to the new 1947 Constitution of Japan as a constitution of defeat. The right wing in Japan, who refused to surrender silently and with humility due to mostly their own identities being wrapped up in the pride and cultural significance of Japan as a powerful force in the world, not only encompassed that of Yukio Mishima, but it didn't end at the politics for him. In fact, it's Mishima's own life and inadequacy that might have been the catalyst for his attachment to the cause of reinstating the imperial nature of Japan. Schrader's film doesn't shy away from this reality. Like most Schrader's films, Mishima gets into the psychology of its titular character. We see the events that made him who he is, a life confined to helicopter parenting by his grandmother, an abusive relationship with his father, an inability to join the military due to a failed medical exam, and a closeted homosexuality which he could not tame. All of these factors created a complex character that was Mishima, only emboldened to delve deeper into right-wing samurai culture after what he saw as Japan's emasculation after the unconditional surrender. When a nation's pride is as devastated as that of Japan after the surrender, extremism thrives from those who wish to restore the nation's former glory and to create their own, in spite of their own shortcomings and insecurities. Fast forward to 2017. Paul Schrader abandons his sex and violence-obsessed films of the past and turns his eyes to slow cinema. First Reformed not only helped reintroduce Paul Schrader to the mainstream, but also gave us one of his best commentaries on the War on Terror. The film follows Ethan Hawke's Reverend Toller as he navigates his crisis of faith. When a young woman at his church asks him to counsel her husband Michael, who just returned from prison, we learn more of Toller's backstory, and it provides greater insight into the deep despair that he is in. In his first conversation with a young man, they discuss bringing children into the world. The man expresses that he doesn't want to bring a child into the world because of the environmental issues that will surely destroy his child's future. Reverend Toller expresses to him his own past with his son. It was a family tradition to sign up for the military. He encouraged his son to enlist, and he ultimately went on a combat deployment in Iraq, where he was eventually killed in action. Toller harbored guilt for ever encouraging his son to fight in a war that had no moral justification, as he says. He broke up his marriage, and he has been alone ever since. This deep pain and failure in his life informs all of his relationships in the film, especially those with women. Esther, a woman who runs the choir at the megachurch Abundant Life, and Toller have a sexual past which ultimately never went anywhere, which we can assume is because of Toller's emotional impotence brought on by his guilt. On the flip side, his longing for a real relationship with a woman since his wife left him is seen in his almost lapdog-like attendance to Mary, the young widow of Michael, who ultimately kills himself after Toller's counsel. He wishes to connect back to reality, which he feels he's relinquished due to his own inadequacy. It is only in the final stages of the film where it all comes full circle. Toller seeks to adopt a jihadist method of a suicide vest to make a statement on the cause of climate change, which he became obsessed with after the death of Mary's husband. In a scene, he places the suicide vest on a bed as he makes his decision to use it for the annual consecration of the church. In the background of the scene, highlighted by a light in the closet, is the American flag he was given by the military when his son was killed in action. The death of Toller's son has turned him into the very type of extremist that his son died fighting against. While the main focus of many war films has always been on the battles, war has rarely encompassed only that. With the rise of the War on Terror, the government expanded the military's power to gain information from the enemy in ways that would subvert the Geneva Convention. Because soldiers that belonged to terror cells were not a part of the fighting forces of actual government organizations, a loophole was created that allowed the United States to sidestep the rules of engagement that applied to traditional enemy combatants. The big elephant in the room of these being torture. Tactics developed and used in Guantanamo Bay were later distributed to prison sites across the Middle East that were under the control of the US military and the CIA. The two main prisons where these actions occurred were Abu Ghraib Prison and Bagram Air Base. This is where Paul Schrader's 2021 film, The Card Counter, enters the fray. A film that follows the story of William Tell, a former inmate at Leavenworth Prison for the crime of torture at Abu Ghraib. In prison, he learned to count cards and uses his newfound skill to make a living for himself, although he is still tortured by the sins of his past. One day, while attending a defense conference at a casino, he realizes that the man who trained him in enhanced interrogation techniques is a free man and government contractor who's giving presentations about information gathering techniques of the future. While at the presentation, he meets Kirk, a young man whose father was also trained by the same man, but later committed suicide. Will sees this as an opportunity to pay for his sins, a solace he did not receive during his time in prison. Schrader as many of us were when the news about the US torture program began breaking, was deeply affected by what many saw as a great immoral evil being committed by a government who claimed to enter the wars in the Middle East on the moral high ground, and in the early case with Afghanistan, utter moral justification. However, the conduct of certain forces in the military was seen with similar reprehensibility as that of the insurgents they were fighting against. If First Reformed was about the cost in lives when engaging in an immoral war, the card counter was about the true immorality of the actions committed during this war. And Schrader doesn't back away from driving that point home any way he can during the film. One instance in particular includes a soaring long take through what can only be described as the hellish conditions of Abu Ghraib, fit with feces-covered inmates and death metal blasting through the speakers. It's very clear that Schrader is upset by the United States' moral failure in the war on terror. However, considering his filmography, he is not surprised. He's been covering this since the 70s with his work, each time taking on a new aspect of what is ultimately the great immorality of humankind: war. The card counter's overt focus on war, not just letting it be the backdrop for character development, spells out exactly the fact that Schrader has been focused on this for a long time. And whether purposefully or not, he's created a body of work that tells a story about the failings of imperialism and the toll of military aggression on enemies, fellow soldiers, and the families of those who have fought in these very conflicts. Thank you everyone for watching this video. I just wanted to point out some stuff that I noticed while watching some of Paul Schrader's work. I'm a huge fan of his, and I felt that these 4 films in his entire body of work really created a kind of pseudo quadrilogy, so to speak, spiritual quadrilogy about the consequences of war, and I found that very, very interesting considering I myself am a big fan of history and I love studying global conflicts. I hope this maybe gave you guys some new movies to check out and some new things to dig deeper on in the films that you already watch. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe for more videos like this, reviews of books and movies, discussion videos, and much more. Thank you very much. I will see you in the next one.